Welcome to Australian basketball history. Why don't we kick off with your name, where you're based, when you were born and how old you are, and how long you've been playing basketball.
Good afternoon, George. Thanks for a couple of easy questions that I can answer straight off the bat, I think. We're based in Melbourne, been around a bit, but Melbourne's always been home. I was born in '38, started to play basketball when I was about 18 years of age, and still going strong.
Fantastic, Ian. Can you take us back to your first influence, the first time basketball appeared on your horizon? What was going on in your life?
That was a time of my life. My dad had been on Gallipoli in the First World War. He was silly enough to saddle up again for the Second World War, and when he passed from injuries he got on Gallipoli, legacy came into our lives. I was the last of 9 kids, and Mum and my next brother, who was still, we were the only 2 at home then, we moved to a soldier settlement place down behind the Parkdale football ground. And the involvement with Legacy took us to the Melbourne drill hall, and every Friday night. So there was this 17-year-old who used to go along with his mum for safekeeping, doing gymnastics, which I hated, but I did it because we could play basketball afterwards, and I loved playing basketball. That grew into a competition between the different drill halls, and that's where I started playing.
At what point in time did you join a club as opposed to a local hall?
Well, that actually grew out of Legacy. There was a guy who had a vision, and you need people in your lives who have got, can think more than tomorrow. And he was a very ordinary basketballer, but he was a great bloke, a good businessman, and he wanted to start a basketball club. So he knew some people within the Legacy system. He came and watched a lot of the games, and he picked 8 or 9 guys out of the Legacy competition, and with them formed the St Kilda Basketball Club. And from there on, that was happening in the late 50s, 56, 7, around that time. And by the time 1970 came around, they were national champions.
You spent lots of time with the Saints, 900 games, captained for 7 years, qualified for Division 1 state championships. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the club and your experiences there.
The club is actually what it was. It wasn't a team, it was a club. It was built with a good structure around it of non-playing people who were just interested in the club, who brought skills and professionalism to the administration. They set about getting financial independence and support, mainly through chook raffles and money-raising ventures. And eventually they gave us the leadership to perform better on the court, and eventually we became a destination club for players, and players who wanted to improve came to St Kilda.
One of the things that you and I have talked about is the administrative backbone of clubs, and I know that you have spoken about leadership and administration and financial independence as being characteristics of St Kilda. Perhaps you could tell a little bit more about that.
Well, there were a lot of, going back a long, long time, but there were teams. There were enthusiasts, there was people who were actively involved with the sport, but really the sport prospered through administration. It was the strong administration that was the backbone of the VABA and the ABU that eventually got the sport through to a stage where it had decent facilities. It offered a career path for people who wanted to explore basketball as a major sport. It started to get the publicity that was needed to encourage people to come along, and all that work was done off the court. And without that work off the court, the on-the-court stuff comes and goes, and progress is very slow. But the acceleration in basketball from 58 onwards, following the Olympics in 56, when Albert Park got put together and all of a sudden there was a 6-court stadium, was just incredible. When I was playing, I was the second tallest on the team. When I finished playing 10 years later, I was the smallest. And it was just showed the development of what a junior program could do, of bringing the talent together, of showcasing it and encouraging. And that's all done by administration. It's not done by anybody else.
Ian, we caught up with a former teammate of yours, Ken Burbridge, some time ago, who spoke about Pop Phelan, but there are others, including Pop, that were part of that administrative and financial backbone. Perhaps you can tell us about some of those personalities.
Yeah, well, Pop was he was our initial president, but the guy who started the club was a guy called Bill Allars, and as Bill was a very ordinary basketballer, but very big on ideas. And he gathered around him. He had a mate, and their background started from the Balaclava Footy Club, and Balaclava Footy Club used to play in the Sunday League in the peanut farm behind Luna Park. Lovely little ground. And he brought with him 2 or 3 people, Ken Downer, Bill Rennick, Mick Ward, and they formed the committee of the club. And they were the administrators, and they were the ones who set about setting the standards, the culture, and raising the funds. And it worked. In fact, I've seen it, George, I've seen it happen again. I've seen it happen with Myths and Legends.
We'll get a chance to talk about your involvement with Myths and Legends. If they were the off-court backbone and strength of the St Kilda Basketball Club, who was on court at that time?
A lot of non-name players. Myself, all of the other 5 or 6 guys from Legacy, and along the way we kept picking up players as the intensity went up. We played Thursday night business houses, C grade, that was a bit of fun. Then we played A grade. We won that title for 22 seasons in a row. And so people saw us play at Albert Park. They saw us, we were always wanted to be, the old adage, if you're not a footballer, look like one when you run out. We had uniforms, tracksuits and so forth when people were dyeing their own singlets and putting a number on the back. So we wanted to make ourselves noted as a club and an organisation, and we knew eventually the players would come, and they did. So, you know, I think probably Kenny Burbridge was the first star player that we attracted. He brought his mate Robbie Johnson with him, and then one by one they started to come over, and those 2 guys who joined us in the late 60s stayed with the team all the way through the 70s, through the glory years, and they were great pickups for the club.
In the late 70s and early 80s, the world started to understand the rivalry that existed between the Boston Celtics and the LA Lakers, but we had our own rivalry right here in Melbourne between the Saints and Melbourne Tigers, and I'm wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, that was an interesting time. Look, during the 60s, there's no doubt in my mind that basketball was very well served by the, as it was called then, the Church of England association team. It was headed up by a guy called Ken Watson, and he had a guy called Lindsay Gaze playing for him. Now, those 2 guys were probably, in my view, the father of basketball in Australia. They single-handedly set standards. that others could aspire to, and if they could catch them, they could beat them. If they couldn't, church kept moving on. They ran a very tight ship, but they put an enormous amount of time into development of juniors and so forth, when that wasn't the thing that people were doing. They started to import Americans before people started to think about doing that. And they were almost unbeatable as a team. At one stage, they had the Olympic coach and 8 of their players were Olympians. And some people are uncomfortable with that. Having worked in basketball in 3 states of Australia, I know there are differing views, but as I look back and say, well, it might have been done better, but I don't think it could have been. And those 2 guys did a hell of a job. St Kilda, but the church operation was very controlled. Ken was a maths teacher at Swinburne Tech. So he used to, the boys that went to Swinburne Tech used to tell me that Ken had put the work up on the backboard, then he'd go and sit in the back of the classroom and read basketball books. But he took on board the Auburn Shuffle from America. He perfected it. He ran it. He recruited people into his team that ran his offence for him, and they were a very, very strong team. On the other hand, the St Kilda outfit, as it developed towards the late 60s, and we were reaching a stage where we actually got to the grand final, and we lost the grand final in 69 to Church by about 20 points. They kicked our bum. So we knew we had to change, and we brought on board a guy called Ken Cole as captain coach, and he brought with him, Ken he'd played in Tasmania and Newcastle. He was a bit of a nomad. He was on the 68 Olympic team. When he got back, we recruited him to take over the coaching job, and he brought with him a style of play which was almost the complete opposite of the church. It was a passing game where people were encouraged to do individual things within the spectrum of the structure of the offence. They were required to play the toughest defence you've ever seen, but it brought a running game to the stadium, and the 2 teams, it couldn't have been different. And it was amazing how it changed. Really, if you look at, I suppose if I stretch it a bit, if you look at the way the NBL's played now, which is all about players' ability, moving the ball quickly to get it free, get it to someone who can take a shot, that was what we were trying to do. And it was great. People loved it.
We always ask who your GOAT was, the greatest of all time for you, and in your case it was Ken Cole.
Look, it's hard to, between eras. It was interesting, the Mormons, when the stadium first opened, the Mormons were allowed to play. The elder saw it as an opportunity of connecting with the community. They had a guy in their team called Bob Scoozens, and he brought to Australia the jump shot. You got to remember in those days the jump shot wasn't the go-to shot. It was, you shot the ball with your feet on the ground. Jumping in the air was bloody unheard of. Scoozens was great. Lindsay Gaze and Bill Wyatt were outstanding players. As we got, and when they brought Fred Guy out, he was about a 6'4" centre player. A wonderful man, great ambassador for American basketball. And he showed people how to play the centre like nobody else had ever played it. So you look at all those players, but when you move into the 70s, Eddie Pelopinskis is probably the best shooter, a pure shooter that Australia's ever had. He was the Steph Curry of the day. but as a person who had an impact on the game, as a leader, a change agent, a bloody hard worker on the court, and a guy with great pride in both the team and his own performance, was Ken Cole.
Well, you mentioned another Ken, and that is Ken Watson, and we were talking about Ken in the context of the 70s, but I'm wondering if we could dial the clock back and go all the way back to the 1956 Olympics, where Ken Watson was the coach of the Australian team in the 1956 Olympics. Tell us about those Olympics, the teams and that time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the 56 Olympics changed a lot for Australia in many, many sports. It gave us facilities that we hadn't had before. The MCG was done and all this sort of stuff. We got swimming pools and so forth. And Victorians supported the Olympics like you couldn't imagine, because there wasn't a lot of television. I don't think there was any television. So people got off their bums and went to games and saw stuff and everything else. The Australian team got in because we were the host nation. Other than that, it was the first time we'd played Olympics. Ken Watson, I think, was secretary of the ABU at that time and so forth, and knew a bit about coaching, so he got the coach's job. Most of the team were made up of personnel who would come to Australia after the Second World War. A lot of Lithuanians, Hungarians, people from up around that region, and they were big men. Peter Bumbers, George Dancis, those sort of guys. And the team was cobbled together. They played at the exhibition buildings. I think there was only about 2,000 or 3,000 people could fit in. It was bloody hard to get a ticket. I couldn't get a ticket to any of the games.
I think there were 15 nations competing, 55 games out at the Royal Exhibition buildings, yeah.
And Australia finished 12th, I think. America won it. And in those days it was strictly amateur. The American team was from college graduates, but they were headlined by a guy called Bill Russell and Oscar Robertson. But Bill Russell was looked on as some sort of a god. He was 6'10", he was athletic. They tell us, the story was that if he hadn't played basketball, he could have competed in the high jump. And he got a lot of publicity for the game. And people went to basketball that perhaps had never seen it before, and they actually saw that, gee, I could fit into this. This is not a bad deal.
So not only was Ken our national basketball coach for the 56 Olympics, he was active in coaching junior and senior players in Victoria. He was the state men's coach at the time, as well as the secretary for both the Victorian Association and the Amateur Basketball Union of Australia. Shortly after the Olympic Games, as history tells us, Ken received a phone call from a Senator, Pat Kennelly, who was chairman of the Albert Park Committee of Management, who proposed the conversion of what was a wartime store building into a 6-court basketball stadium. You were around at that time, Ian, so what can you tell us about the start of Albert Park?
Yeah, I was around that time. Those times I think I was playing at the Dog Pavilion in the showgrounds. We played in anything you could find. But Ken and his team of administrators in Melbourne had pushed very, very hard local councils to build stadiums. After the 56 games, the heat went up a bit. The publicity around the games had given basketball a bit of a heads up. He got support from a couple of councils. He got some funds behind him. But down at Albert Park Lake, there was 3 army surplus stores, igloo type things, bloody great big things they were. And Pat Kennelly, who was chair of the Senator of the Albert Park Trust, he wanted them converted into sports venues. So he picked basketball, table tennis and badminton. He gave one to each of the associations. So Ken put the money that they had cobbled together to build new stadiums into developing what they had there. It was a great central location. It had reasonable transport for people to get to, and 6 courts, which was at that stage, I think, the biggest stadium in the Southern Hemisphere. It was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful anchor home for basketball. And Ken and his team who drove it, you know, we should always be forever thankful for them, because without the stadium, goodness knows how much longer it would have taken to go along.
Ian, if we're going to tell the story about Ken Watson and his contribution to the sport of basketball and standards, we also have to tell the story of his wife Betty and her contribution to the game. Perhaps you can tell us about Betty.
Look, how unique can one family be? I mean, Ken was a gruff school teacher, and he had this beautiful wife, Betty, who always had a smile on her face, and you wouldn't think, you know, butter wouldn't melt in her mouth, but she was a real driver as well. And she, I think any of the girls around basketball would admit that without Betty Watson, the girls' game would not have progressed as quickly as it did. And in actual fact, that progressed a lot quicker than what the men did. The women's game grew exponentially, much, much faster, and they got into Olympic basketball on their own rights, on standards. And they performed exceptionally well. And Betty, I think she got an Order of Australia or something like that, which was well deserved for her contribution. It was amazing.
Some of the descendants of the Watson family are still involved in basketball.
They are. They're running around as myths and legends.
Playing tournaments.
Yeah, playing tournaments and everything else. And the history of the Watson family and what Ken and Betty did, and his very strong working, and I think probably even more than working, relationship with Lindsay Gaze is, I think, the biggest chapter in Australian basketball.
If we fast forward to 1979, the father of the NBL, New South Wales Basketball President John Raschke, sat down with 10 other interested parties in an unused aircraft hangar at Sydney Airport and discussed for the first time the formation of a national competition that would help develop the sport throughout the country. In 1979, the league launched its inaugural season and the NBL was born. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was there involved at the time. At that time, we were living in Sydney, and I was secretary of the Sydney Basketball Council. John Raschke was based in Newcastle, and he was president of the state body. And John was a visionary guy as well. Basketball had come from being very much an inbred state operation, and each of the warlords, there was Bob Young in Queensland and Doc Raschke and Ken Watson and Frank Angove in South Australia, they drove their own state program, and they drove it very hard. And of course, when it got up to national level, the state rivalries were if you think St Kilda and Church was a rivalry on the court, there was a lot of rivalry off the court between the different administrations. But John could see past the state structure. We were already playing club basketball, and that was the titles that were on the 78 club championships, which were held in Alexandria Stadium in Sydney. In which I helped organise, and I helped John put this meeting together actually. And we just invited those clubs that were there to come and talk about taking the next step. And the next step was to move to sort of a franchised operation, and the NBL. We had enough interest. There was a steering group put together, and they set down some of the criteria for the clubs to attend and so forth, and it was embraced because the clubs had a good feel of what club basketball could do, how it opened up. We had 16-team tournament, clubs from every state in Australia, and they could see the potential of having a Premier League, which was at that stage going to be semi-professional, and it moved on from there.
I know we're jumping around a little bit in the timeline, but there's an opportunity to ask you a question about how might we go about structuring a national Masters Basketball League, given that that was the model back then, led by John Raschke and supported by yourself and others, the federated or the states coming together in one discussion and agreeing on what they wanted. How would we, you think, go about getting some more structure and organisation and strategy behind Masters Basketball in Australia?
I think the blueprint's probably the same, George. You have to do it with the support of the current incumbents. They have to see the benefits of doing it. They have to be involved in the decision making of what the new model's going to look like. And then a steering group which represents, the major players, comes up with a framework, and that can be discussed perhaps at the next gathering of the group. But to me, it's a shame that Masters Basketball has drifted away from as a core activity for the sport itself, and it's been to a degree hijacked by other interests who it's almost a business enterprise for them. Now, they've done it very well, and I'm not saying that's not successful, but is it actually fulfilling the need and the role, and will it develop? Can we do more? Should we be doing more? All those sort of questions have to be examined and answered, and if the answer is yes, we can, and yes, this will be the benefits, well then I think there's probably room for both, but there's certainly room for a joint effort from the incumbents and wherever the sport may want to push it to.
Let's talk through the Masters Basketball chapter of your playing career. What was your first Masters tournament? How many have you played? How many Worlds have you played versus domestic tournaments?
My first outing was in Alice Springs, I think. That was terrific. So that was about 4 years in, I guess. Late 90s, mid 90s. Well, it started in 98, didn't it? Alice Springs. I think I've been to about 15 or 16. I've only done one Worlds, that was in Portland, Oregon in 98. Enjoyed that a lot. It's great, you go there and you actually I never played international basketball, but fast forward 40 years and I'm playing against the guys who were playing 40 years ago. I think it's a great concept. The things that Mist and Legend have been able to do has been because they do all the work. I've just got to show up, and it's fantastic. It's a great, and you can make, an early commitment or a late commitment or whatever the hell. But all the way along the line, you keep looking over your shoulder and you look at, Jack with his boot full of bloody uniforms and the work that Ian Farr put in, and it's just amazing. He must have the biggest network of basketballers ever, I think. He can ring anybody up in the world almost and talk to them. But it's been a great journey. I've enjoyed it immensely, and hopefully not the end yet.
You spoke about the importance of that administrative backbone to the organisation, and one of the things it does very well is hold weekly training sessions here at the Veneto Club where we're filming today. And so regular as clockwork, we see you most Friday mornings come out with some of our members and have a run. Tell us about that experience for you.
Yeah, it's amazing. I didn't play for a number of years. After we went to Guam, I had a hip replacement, and my surgeon said, well, there's 15 years on a hip. If you play golf, probably 10 if you play basketball. So I didn't play for a while. Then I thought, well, that doesn't really matter, it's only on a hip. So Des de Kretzer got into me one day and said, you've got to come out on a Friday, it's terrific. And I come out, and I've been coming out ever since. And it is terrific. It's good to mix with people who have played the sport, You get the companionship of being here, you get the exercise for being here, and you get another reason to get out of bed. And I look forward to Friday mornings. It's a good experience.
Your Masters basketball career highlight?
Just in the last tournament in Adelaide, I got to coach a team. I don't know, I think they were 65s. And we won a game. And one of the guys, I won't mention his name, came up to me afterwards and then he said, "This is my 7th tournament and it's the first game I've ever won." And he was sort of saying, you know, well done. And I thought, fantastic. You know, because to me, you know, you want to play and you want to win, and I've always been happy if you've done your bit, and if in doing your bit you've helped other people do their bit and the team wins, that's bonus. But I think in Myths and Legends basketball, to me there's no myths and legends. I think everyone who's playing is a legend. And I walk around the courts and I watch it and I see the intensity with which the different age groups play. It drops off a bit as you get, but when you go over the line, the spirit's still there, and everyone is giving their best. And I think, isn't that fantastic?
Will we see you playing or coaching either at the July Bulleen Masters Tournament or alternatively Pan-Pacs in November?
Probably not. July we go away, and November is a family time. Both our girls have their birthdays in about the same time as the game, so you know I've been up there once, but no, I probably won't do that. But it's interesting, you know, there are people who come down who are late starters and they want to learn, and it's terrific just to talk with them and chat with them and help them. And you've got some people there who've got terrific attributes, and they just got to learn the skills of the game a bit.
Ian, how's family? How's your family?
Our family's terrific. My life's been, the 3 pillars of my life have been family, work and sport. The fact I picked basketball was to my benefit, because I met my wife through basketball. I don't think I would have ever got married, I don't think, if I hadn't. I actually coached the first girls team that St Kilda put in, and I married one of the girls. So I'm very thankful for that. My 2 daughters both played basketball and still enjoy the sport. But where our moves took us to the 3 states of Australia, and where I was able to join in basketball in each of those places, and New Zealand and Singapore. And basketball was a family connection with the new communities that we went to. So the kids had their school, we had basketball, and all of a sudden we had a circle of friends. So it's been a very good journey as far as the family is concerned, and I'm very thankful for basketball for it.
How's your health these days?
Good. Yeah, no, and you always, you know, and even the medicos will say, qualify it with the famous statement, for a person your age. Yeah, things wearing out a bit, but no, look, we're very pleased and very happy with the way life has treated us.
And what do you do when you're not playing basketball and coaching and doing other things? Tell us about the other parts of your life.
Well, these days, retirement is, you know, like everyone else. I don't know how you've ever found time to work. No, but we have a very full life. I play golf a couple of times a week, and I live in a high-rise apartment, and I'm chairman of the board of that OC, so you know, I keep my interest there on the administration of the building. I have my outlets with golf and I have my basketball, so all of a sudden with the family, the week's gone again.
Well, Ian, thanks for spending a bit of time with us today. people who are meeting you for the first time on camera won't know that you've got the unofficial title of club historian. You've got more facts and history and detail in that head of yours than we find in nearly anyone else that we speak to. Appreciate your contribution to the sport, to the St Kilda organisation, to Myths and Legends, and otherwise to us and our viewers today. Thanks, Ian.
Been a pleasure, George. Thank you.